In my humble opinion, the 2015 Denis Villeneuve film Sicario is an underrated example of near-perfect filmmaking. It's a thriller that's more than just a thriller, and it has a style and substance that is sadly far too seldom seen in cinema these days, certainly in this particular genre. It's one of those rare action thrillers that you can keep watching over and over again without it ever losing its original tension, and where each subsequent viewing reveals a new layer of depth that you might have missed the previous time around. For me, Sicario is the answer to the question, if the Silence of the Lambs and Heat were to have a baby, what would it look like? In fact, one of the things that struck me almost immediately about Sicario were the parallels between the character of Kate Mercer, played by Emily Blunt, and that of Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster in The Silence of the Lambs. Both of them are tough young female FBI agents. Both of them are idealistic. Both of them are forced to pursue psychopathic monsters on an assignment they are largely unqualified for, and both of them are being manipulated like pawns in someone else's game. The first time Kate is observed, interrogated and recruited by Matt Graver in a glass-walled meeting room, it was just so reminiscent of the uncomfortable observation, interrogation and recruitment of Clarice Starling by Hannibal Lecter when she first meets him in his glass-walled prison cell in The Silence of the Lambs. The writing of the character of Kate Mercer by Sicario screenwriter Taylor Sheridan is one of the standout aspects of this film for me, especially in the current climate of cookie-cutter female leads who far too often feel like they've been written to teach the patriarchy a thing or two, or to preach a pre-approved checklist of feminist doctrinal talking points to us, the audience. Such characters lack realism and they lack depth, but not so Kate Mercer. She isn't in this film to be eye candy for the audience, or the superficial damsel in distress so that her male counterparts can have someone to heroically rescue during the third and final act, but at the same time, neither is she an indestructible or all-powerful Mary Sue who doesn't need anyone or anything else to complete her character. She shows genuine vulnerability, she has weaknesses that almost get her killed, and she grapples with an interesting internal struggle about the morality of the actions she finds herself engaged in. She has an authentic female strength that screams of the profoundly feminine gift of motherhood and its desire to protect the vulnerable while avoiding becoming a monster in the process. Kate Mercer is a superbly written character who has depth, complexity, and who feels like a real person, as opposed to a set of cut-and-paste tropes or ideological messages. Most importantly of all, she is a likeable character that we, the audience, find ourselves invested in, which is obviously vitally important because it is her journey that we are on for most of the duration of this film. There are some really great character moments involving Kate Mercer, but one of my favourites was her fight scene with the character of Ted, the corrupt cop, played by John Bernthal. The tension begins when Kate suddenly sees the coloured money band that Ted had in his pocket and instantly realises that he is actually one of the bad guys. She immediately calls a halt to their moment of physical intimacy and gets up off the couch, but Ted follows her. She knows she is in danger and has to get to her gun, but Ted is too close, so she does the only thing she can. She lunges at him with a forceful two-handed upper body push to try and create the precious seconds and distance that she needs to get to her gun. She launches her attack on him with all of the strength she can muster, but her push doesn't really have any major impact, and thus she doesn't have the time or the space she needs to get her weapon and gain the upper hand. Ted is able to quickly recover from her push, attack, disarm, and subdue her before beginning to strangle her to death. Kate is only saved by the intervention of the character of Alejandro once he enters and forces Ted at gunpoint to stop his attempted murder just seconds before he manages to kill Kate. It's not just the realistic nature of the way their fight unfolds in that scene that I appreciate, but also the physical realism of the way this type of encounter would actually happen if a woman was to find herself in this very situation with a physically stronger male. A lesser film would not only have included over-the-top martial arts choreography in that sequence, but it's more than likely that Kate, the female lead in a modern action thriller, wouldn't have been allowed to be so easily, albeit realistically, subdued by her male opponent. A lesser film would have instead treated this as a moment for her to display unrealistic physical strength and to defeat Ted with a burst of patriarchy-smashing feminist superpowers. But Sicario is not one of those lesser films, and Kate Mercer is not a one-dimensional feminist fantasy of what the perfect female action lead should look like, which means that she has been allowed to fail in order for the stakes to be real and for the audience to care about the character and her development in the story. But Kate Mercer isn't the only character who personifies the excellence of Taylor Sheridan's writing in Sicario. The other two male leads, Matt Graver, played by Josh Brolin, and the aforementioned Alejandro, played by Benicio del Toro, are also equally well crafted in this movie. Take, for example, the scene when we first meet Matt Graver in that glass meeting room when Kate is recruited to join his team. Graver is wearing flip-flops, but he is being treated as someone important by the other men who are wearing suits and ties in that room. These subtle yet powerful visual cues tell us a lot about the character of Matt Graver. At first glance, we could be tempted to look solely at his extremely casual attire and assume that he is a character who is somewhat akin to that of Pappas, played by Gary Busey in the movie Point Break. But the fact that Graver is being treated with the utmost respect as a person of authority by the other more formally dressed men in that room tells us that he is nothing like Pappas, who is considered a joke by the other agents he serves with in Point Break. What these visual story points are actually telling us before Matt Graver has even uttered any meaningful or expository dialogue is that he is a character who operates outside the normal boundaries of law enforcement, but he does so for a serious reason, and not simply because he is a lazy or clownish renegade who doesn't like following the rules. This is actually an important moment of foreshadowing because by the end of the film, that is exactly what Matt Graver has been revealed to be, a ruthless and calculating agent of the government who works well outside the norms of acceptable law enforcement practices. Another great aspect of Sicario is the soundtrack by Johan Johansson. Just like the rest of the film, the score isn't your usual thriller fare, and it adds another essential dimension to the storytelling in this movie. One of the key elements of Sicario is the dramatic tension and the way in which that never really ceases from the very first moments of the film to the very final scene. But this isn't your usual dramatic tension. There is also a powerful sense of uncertainty, which leaves you unsure of exactly where and when the next threat is going to be coming from a lot of the time during this film. Johansson uses beating drums which swell and reduce in volume to heighten the tension and the sense of ever-present danger. And just to hammer home the point, he includes a cello playing a similar motif to that which is heard whenever the shark attacks were impending in the movie Jaws, as well as some bombastic horns just for good measure. But it's not merely the dramatic tension that the soundtrack heightens, there is also the sense of isolation in the music, and it also mirrors the way that this film does not end with a nice, neat resolution. The musical themes in Sicario consistently don't resolve in a traditional fashion. Not only does this reflect one of the main themes of Sicario, the unceasing war against the drug cartels, but it also adds to the uncertainty and almost constant feeling of ever-present danger, the sort of danger that can suddenly arise again in truly brutal ways without any prior warning. One of my favourite musical moments in Sicario comes during one of the final compositions in the film. It's called Soccer Game. The drums, which are an ever-present musical element that signal impending danger throughout the movie, suddenly return again at the end of the film during this composition in one of the loudest and most dramatic crescendos of the entire film. At first, this seems contradictory, because we are at the very moment in the movie where the story is concluding. The good guys have been victorious, and therefore the danger should have passed, right? So why the crescendoing drums? Perhaps the score is actually trying to suggest to us that this isn't really a victory and that the danger hasn't actually passed at all. Instead, it was just another momentary lapse in the proceedings, and the brutalities of this ongoing war are simply preparing to ramp up again as they have so many times previously. Or perhaps this is a musical moment that is posing more of a question, and the score is actually inviting us to consider whether or not the good guys have now become the bad guys and are the new source of danger. Regardless, this is yet another great moment in a truly excellent soundtrack by Johan Johansson. In the end, Sicario is a film that treats its audience with respect by raising more questions than it answers, leaving us, the audience, to ponder these questions and then draw our own conclusions. A lesser film would treat us like idiots. It would be stacked with propaganda and simplistic characters, all in an effort to do all the thinking for us and to lead us to the conclusion that the creators wanted us to draw from the movie. But Sicario isn't one of those films, which is why we never really get an answer to questions like, is this a movie about the evils of drugs and drug trafficking, or is it a movie about the ethics and efficacy of the way the US is choosing to respond to those problems? Is Alejandro the righteous crusader, or is Kate? What of her decision to sign that piece of paper at the end of the film? Was she merely afraid, or is this her reluctant acceptance of the methodologies of Matt Graver and Alejandro? And when she refuses to shoot Alejandro from her balcony, was that her taking the high moral ground? Was she giving up? Or once again, was she signalling that she understands and accepts that he is right and she is wrong about how this war should be waged? And that's the beauty of Sicario. It doesn't spoon feed you easy answers, instead it leaves you to decide for yourself. One of the most important questions posed in this film comes at the very end after the killing of the character Silvio, which leaves his wife without a husband and his young son without a father. Silvio's death is actually the most meaningful one in the entire film because it raises a profoundly important question. Have Alejandro, Matt Graver and the rest of their team actually become the very thing they have set out to destroy? You see, by killing Silvio, Alejandro has done something similar to the evil that was perpetrated against him, and which the US government is supposed to be using him to bring an end to. Except this time, unlike the wrong done to Alejandro, it isn't the wife and child who are killed, it is the father, while the wife and child remain alive. But is the effect of this any less devastating? Another family has still been destroyed, and those left behind are forced to deal with the brutality, grief, and evil that has been forced upon them. And did Silvio really deserve death for his part in all of this? Remember, we never once see him kill or threaten anyone in this film. Instead, he comes across as a simple father whose worst crime is being a drug mule. Was this something he did regularly? Or was this the first time he had ever transported drugs? And was he just doing this out of some need that his family had? He certainly didn't seem to be reaping any significant financial or lifestyle advantages for his actions. Is this a moment where, just like Kate Mercer, we are being forced to finally confront the reality that we too have been deceived this entire time? Here we were thinking that Alejandro and Matt Graver were the heroes, engaged in the important work of protecting the innocent from great evil, when in reality they, or more particularly their brutal methodologies, have actually been just as serious a threat to peace this entire time. Or is Alejandro right and actually addressing us, the audience, when he concludes the movie by telling Kate that she should move to a small town, somewhere the rule of law still exists? You will not survive here. You are not a wolf. And this is a land of wolves now. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon. There's a link in the description below and a link on screen at the end of this video. A huge thank you to all of the names currently on screen who have donated to Left Foot Media on Patreon this month. You guys are awesome and I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.